Hi, everyone, and welcome to our program titled A Dog's Life in Antiquity. This is part of the Art Break series, where we take inspiration from an object in the Getty's collection to encourage new conversations about ancient art and cultures. Today, our topic is the lives of pet dogs in Greek and Roman antiquity. My name is Christina DeFabio, and I'm the graduate intern in public programs at the Getty Villa Museum, and I'm also an archaeologist. So if you'd like, as we get started in the chat, it's open. You can share your favorite dog breed or mix of breeds. And I'm honored to be joined today by Michael McKinnon, who is a professor of classics at the University of Winnipeg. He's an expert in pets in ancient Greece and Rome and a zoo archaeologist, or a scholar who studies ancient animal bones. Welcome, Michael.
Hello, wonderful to be here for this exciting conversation. As an archaeologist who works across the Mediterranean, I'm very fortunate to combine that reconstruction of the past with a love of animals as well. Certainly we hear lots about ancient emperors and rulers in antiquity, but I think the stories about the animals are just as exciting and as important. They fulfill multiple roles, from providers of meat, milk, wool, resources, and such, to pets that we'll be talking about today, which I think a lot of the audience will have an affinity for as well.
So in the next slide, we'll be looking at the piece that inspired our conversation here today. So this is on display at the Getty Villa Museum. It's a Roman grave stele or tombstone with a sculpture of a Maltese type dog dated to AD 150 to 200. So as I mentioned, I'm an archaeologist and an educator, and I got interested in this topic when I first saw this object, as I used to have a Maltese dog when I was little. It was my childhood pet. His name was Mercury, just kind of a not common dog name, but he was very small and fast. So my sister and I somehow equated that with the planet Mercury, which is the smallest planet and the one that moves fastest around the sun. So unfortunately, he passed away a while ago, and I don't have any more pets, but I still love dogs. So we'll now be looking at the grave stele for Helena. So it's made of marble, it's in the form of a shrine, and it has a relief of a small dog at the top, and it's facing the viewer. The face is a bit worn, but clearly shows a dog that's maybe a bit older. The Latin inscription underneath it says, "To Helena, foster daughter, the incomparable and worthy soul." So scholars have debated whether or not the tombstone is for a dog named Helena or for a young girl named Helena, and the dog here was shown here as her pet. But most favor that it was for a girl, actually, because the text doesn't directly state that it's for a dog, as other funerary inscriptions do, which we'll look at later. And the word alumna, which is translated as foster daughter, tends to refer to people. But in either case, the dog is definitely representing a once beloved pet, wouldn't you say, Michael?
Yes, tombstones were expensive in antiquity, and depicting this special dog like this one, small one with female, perhaps pregnant, with pricky ears and a short snout, rounded head, certainly denotes great social value for that animal in particular. So where did these small breeds come about? Well, in our next slide, you'll see that in Greek and Latin, they're called Melitan dogs, derived from the name of the ancient place Melite. And some authors have associated that Melite with modern Malta, the red circle in the map here, an island off the coast of Sicily in the Mediterranean, and others have associated it with the coast off of Croatia, where modern Milžite in the blue circle is. Genetically, these dogs originated in South Central Europe, though probably not Malta. They're called Maltese, probably due to the association of that island as an important trading depot where goods were shipped, including dogs. So these small dogs first appear in Greek art during the classical period, about the 5th century BC, in various media, frequently depicted with children and women. They later proliferate during Roman times. Often they act as elite status symbols, a possession to show off and attract attention, as might commonly occur today too.
Yes, so in the next slide, we have another example from the Getty collection showing an ancient lapdog type from the classical Greek period. So we see the full object on the left and the close-up of the dog on the right. It's a grave stele of a boy named Maskion, as identified on an inscription on the piece, with his dog. And as you can see, he's playing with the dog, and on the right, the dog is jumping up to Maskion and on his hind legs on a rock. So we wanted to show this grave stele as well as the grave stele for Helena to show you how these lap dogs were depicted in Greek and Roman art. Overall, they were small, had short legs, a curled tail, and pointy ears. And this object in particular was made in the region of Attica, which is the area of Greece that includes the city of Athens. And if you want to learn more about dogs in ancient Athens in particular, we're putting a resource in the chat for you to watch later. But in the next slide, you can see how these ancient lap dogs were similar to some modern breeds we know and love today. So they're similar to Maltese and Pomeranians. So how did these small lap dogs come about, Michael?
Well, first we have to step farther back in time. So in this next slide, the domestication of the dog likely occurred during the Ice Age about 30,000 years ago. And they originated from wolves, the wolf in the center here, with various derived dog breeds around it. Wolves were attracted to human camps and settlements because of the extra meat and refuse deposited there. As humans and wolves learned to tolerate each other and surplus meat was given to those animals, well, eventually a bond developed and domesticated dogs resulted. These dogs then flourished across many areas, assuming various duties and responsibilities as humans developed agriculture during the Neolithic, and then advanced in creating larger cities and civilizations like the Greeks and Romans after that. So in the next slide, we see that once domesticated, the ancient Greeks and Romans recognized the value of manipulating various animals, including dogs. So this diagram on the left side here displays the range in centimeters or for withers or shoulders height for different dogs across timeframes, from the Neolithic and Bronze Age at the beginning there, down through the Iron Age, so period when Greek civilization was flourishing, through Roman times at the bottom. So you can see that during the Neolithic at the top and the Bronze Age, when kingdoms and empires were building in the Aegean, that the height ranges for dogs was between 35 and 55 centimeters. During the Iron Age, when Greek civilization was building, there was a push to create larger size varieties of dogs, probably those that were favored more for hunting or as guard dogs, things that were especially prized or valued during Greek antiquity. And with the Roman period, manipulation intensified, not only in developing larger sized dogs, but also in the spread on the left side there of those smaller toy breeds, around 20 centimeters.
Yes, and in the next slide, we get a sense of these different types of ancient dogs from art. So dogs are depicted in many types of materials in ancient art, ranging from marble used in the tombstones we saw earlier, as well as sculpture to decorate houses and public spaces, to small items such as gems and personal finger rings. So here we have examples of guard and hunting dogs in contrast to the lap dogs we saw earlier. On the left is a sculpture of a guard and sheepdog called the Molossian dog type, and it supposedly came from northwestern Greece. So as you can see, this dog is much larger, very muscular and boxy, which would have suited it very well to guarding a house or guarding a flock of sheep. And on the right, in this Italian engraved gem that's set into a ring, we see a young man with his hunting dog. So in contrast to the guard dog, the hunting dog is very sleek, longer, but also muscular. So this would have been an ideal shape for running and chasing prey. I love the fingering as well because you can get a great sense of companionship between the dog and his owner as they're looking at each other while the man is offering his dog some food. So these larger size varieties of dogs existed before the Romans, but Romans took breeding to the extremes. They bred both larger and smaller dogs, and they also played with various shapes, thus creating a host of forms, from small slender types such as dachshunds, the greyhounds that we think of today, to long-bodied, short-legged varieties like dachshunds, to very small toy breeds such as the Maltese and Pomeranians we've already looked at.
Yes, as seen in the next slide, the Romans certainly recognized the social and economic value of manipulating dogs, making some stronger, faster, taller, cuter, fluffier, and so forth. In part, think of the categories that go into the modern dog shows. The Romans were keen on that kind of canine diversity as well. But the Romans were especially fond of those toy breeds. Their spread throughout the Roman world coincides with an increased presence of these types in art and archaeology, such as the small-scale terracotta sculptures depicting militant dogs that come from modern Italy and Turkey, as depicted in this slide here. Unlike larger dogs, these lap varieties presumably serve no other purpose than as pets. They needed human care, but certainly gave back with love, devotion, attention, and as status symbols to impress others. Again, many today may treat their dogs with, and especially the small toy breeds, in a similar fashion.
Yes, definitely. An important question to consider, though, Michael, is did the ancient Greeks and Romans consider their dogs pets?
Yes, as the next slide shows, certainly pets existed in antiquity, but we should be cautious about viewing the concept in the same way as we might consider pets today. Nevertheless, those in antiquity do show episodes of genuine care and concern for animals, and even the act of naming a dog can be argued as a marker of humanizing them, sort of effectively making them a pet. Toy breeds certainly naturally align as pets. They need attention and protection, but certainly give back with lots of love. The Romans especially like to show off, and toy breeds could showcase well. Certainly in antiquity, some dogs, such as the Helena example we've considered already, were important to mark status, but there's also symbolism in dogs, aspects about power, strength, devotion, care, fidelity, companionship, and even curative aspects are noted, with dogs linked to the healing god Asclepius. So those symbolic qualities are even referenced or reflected in the ancient dogs' names and nicknames. So some common examples, as shown here, are related to quickness and strength, including the literal spaude, or speed in Greek, and ferox, or fierce in Latin. Other names compare the dogs to animals associated with different traits, such as Latin names lupa for wolf and tigris for tiger. But skylax, or puppy, in Greek might be the most familiar to us, highlighting cuteness and companionship for sure.
Yes, Skylax is definitely my favorite ancient dog name. So cute. So texts also give us a variety of small dog names that's often related to their appearance. So a few Greek names are Kalafine, which comes from the Greek word for basket, kalathos, so implying that it's so small it could fit inside a basket, and Mia, or fly, which probably again refers to the small size of the dog. And then the next slide, we have an example of how art can provide us with some ancient dog names. So this is a Roman mosaic from modern Tunisia, and it shows the hunting scenes. So you can see the hunters on horseback and on foot, as well as the dogs in front of them chasing a hare up top and maybe a fox at the bottom. So they're labeled with two Latin names, the dogs. So the top one is named Adoratus, which means adorned with ivy, which perhaps is reflecting the owner's wish for the dog to be successful in the hunt, or that the dog is very successful in the hunt, because plant crowns were often associated with victory in antiquity. And the bottom one is named Mustela, or weasel, which perhaps suggests the fast speed of the dog, like a weasel. And if you look closely, you may also see that the two dogs in the mosaic are wearing collars. So we have some more examples of this in our next slide. So the Greeks and Romans probably didn't walk their dogs like we do today, but they did use collars to protect and identify their dogs. So the ancient Roman author Varro talks about how sheepdogs in particular had leather collars studded with nail heads to protect them from attacks like from wolves or other animals. People also attached chains to their dogs' collars, or also leashes to the dogs' collars to tie their dogs outside. So for example, they secured their guard dogs outside of the house, or they kept their hunting and sheepdogs in place when the dogs weren't out working. So this is exemplified by the mosaic from Pompeii on the left with a dog and the inscription in Latin Cave Canem underneath, which means beware of dog. And so if you look closely, you can see that the dog is wearing a collar and there's a chain attached to the collar. So implying that it would be keeping the guard dog outside of the house. So artistic depictions of small dogs, such as terracotta figurines, like of this Melitene dog, often also show them wearing collars with circular objects. So unfortunately, the nose on this one is a bit broken, but you can clearly see the dog's collar, and there's one of these objects in the center and a couple on the side. So these are often interpreted as bells so that people could hear their dogs as they were walking by, or they were amulets that the owners thought would protect their dogs. And then the next slide, we can also compare feeding practices in antiquity with how we feed our pets today. So again, Varro talks about feeding sheepdogs in particular. He says that you should feed them barley bread soaked in milk, bone broth, and broken bones to strengthen their teeth and jaws. But he warns that you shouldn't feed them sheep meat because that may encourage them to attack the flocks they're in fact supposed to protect. But overall, he notes that dogs eat similar foods to people and they often get scraps of meat. So we can imagine both bigger and smaller dogs got some treats from their owners' meals. And in addition, companionship and play in the routine was important for the dogs, especially with the toy breeds, as we see here. So in this limestone grave stele, a young girl is playing with a small dog. She's probably teasing it with a bird, and she's probably also holding another bird in her left hand. So overall, all these activities are ways that people in the past treated their pets, their dogs, like one of the family.
Yes, in the next slide, probably one of the clearest ways that people in the past humanized their dogs was by burying them. So even if the grave stele for Helena was not for a dog, we have many examples of burials of dogs, both from zooarchaeological evidence and from tombstones. So in the next slide, we see necropolis or cemetery Yasmina in ancient Carthage, Tunisia. This offers a wonderful case study of lapdog care in both life and death. Burial sites in Roman antiquity were typically located outside the outskirts of the city. The Yasmina necropolis was situated near the circus or the racetrack at Carthage, as shown here on the left. The cemetery spanned chiefly from the 1st to the 4th century AD. At first, the site held cremation burials, but during the 3rd and 4th century, inhumation was the norm. And among those inhumation burials was that of a small dog, whose skeleton is displayed here on the right. It was special, since it was this dog was given its own grave and placed among the humans, an extremely rare phenomenon. And so begging the question, was this dog possibly considered human-like itself? The dog burial further contained grave goods, in particular special perfume vase. So great efforts were put into the burial. Indeed, most of the human graves didn't have any artifacts at all. Clearly, this dog was cherished. So the next slide, we get a closer examination of his skeleton, which showed other unique features. So it was small in size, about 22 centimeters at the withers, so clearly a toy breed, but probably like those Maltese varieties we've noted already. It was about 13 or 14 years in age, so quite elderly, but still active and lively, and most certainly a valued pet. The dog exhibited numerous skeletal pathologies. It had lost all its upper teeth. So in the top left is its skull there. You can see it lost all the teeth, and at an early age, since the bone had healed over and where the space for the teeth were. In the lower jaw, it also had lost most of its teeth, save for a couple of molars, and the top right depicts the lower jaw, which themselves, they had thick layers of sort of calculus or plaque, the stuff that your dentist scrapes away. Effectively, this dog could not crunch, so it needed a diet of soft food and probably ground up meat, which it would gobble down. Its legs displayed further pathologies. There's advanced osteoarthritis throughout the skeleton, and you can see the shiny articular ends of the long bones, like in the bottom right femur here. That shiny part happens when all the cartilage at the joints is worn away and the bone is rubbing on bone, so it's rather painful. But most intriguingly, the left hip bone or pelvis, shown here on the bottom left of the screen, displays evidence that the femur, or the leg bone that joins into it, dislocated out of that hip socket at some point during the dog's life, but then repositioned itself to form a whole new hip socket. No, it wasn't a three-legged dog, but it was still very energetic. So all of those conditions are very advanced and would certainly require great care to feed, protect, and pamper this dog. It had a long, treasured life and a special, unique death as well.
Yes, it's definitely a very special dog. So in the next slide, we have another example from a text on how a dog was treated like a human, and the text literally says this. So people, in addition to burying their dogs in antiquity, also honored their dogs with funerary inscriptions. So this is a text from our sarcophagus or a marble coffin from Termessos in modern Turkey. And it's a smaller size sarcophagus, so it was meant for a dog. And there was a Greek inscription on it that translates to, this is the tomb of the dog Stephanos, which means crown, who perished, whom Rhodope shed tears for and buried like a human. I am the dog Stephanos, and Rhodope set up a tomb for me. So this is a really touching example that shows how the woman Rhodope really cared for her dog. She treated him like a human and buried him as people do today with their pets still when they pass away. So Michael, are there other examples of dogs being buried like humans, as we saw with the Yasmina example?
Fortunately, not that many. So in the next slide, we see that certainly there are lots of archaeological examples of dog burials in antiquity, but most of those are of larger breeds with fewer cases of those larger breeds in their own graves. In fact, most of the dog burials we have accompany a human grave. So these dogs are secondary, perhaps a grave good or symbolic addition in those human graves, it seems. So outside of cemetery sites, yes, there's evidence of different toy breeds of dogs found from different excavations across the Roman world, including in places like Britain, Germany, France, Spain. Thus, those small toy breeds were traded and spread throughout the empire, possibly through elite trade networks. Nevertheless, only a handful of those toy breed skeletons are from burial sites. So those are the places and the burial sites where the care of the dogs extended into death as well. Beyond Yasmina, as this next slide shows, there's another example of a small male dwarf-sized dog, about 25 centimeters at its shoulder, recovered within its own grave at the 4th century site of Leicester in the UK. So this small toy breed was in good health, kind of unlike the Yasmina dog. And although it's a lap dog, it was certainly of a different breed than the round-headed, sort of short-snouted variety that we've seen at the Yasmina cemetery. Still, its burial in its own grave denotes special attention, and maybe this dog is human-like in those characteristics as well.
Yes, these small dogs really got a lot of care. So we have another example of this in the next slide, which shows a longer burial inscription, which was originally in Latin from the 2nd century AD. And it shows how a small dog received a lot of attention during and after its life. So this slide shows the first half of the text, which is for a dog named Patrice, or noble in Latin. And so the owner in the inscription cries for Patrice, who has passed away almost at the age of 15. We can infer that Patrice was a smaller dog because the owner laments how Patrice will not be able to sit in their lap any longer. And they talk about how they honor Patrice with a marble tomb. And we have the rest of the text in the next slide, which talks about how Patrice was clever like a human. So again, we see how people in the past were also humanizing their pets. Patrice would join at the table and beg for food. She would wag her tail when she saw her owner, and the owner would even hand feed her. So this is a super sweet inscription, which I can really relate to. And I think many of you here today, as well as pet owners around the world, can relate to this today. It's an example of how people of the past treasured affection from their pets and remembered this affection when their pets have passed away.
Yeah, certainly in the next slide, we see that some pets get showered with love, but are there other signs of medical care for those dogs? And were any mistreated? From our ancient sources, there's suggestions for veterinarian care. There are noted, and a few of them are listed on the left here. Columella, an ancient author, for example, suggests rubbing sore dog ears with bitter almonds to promote healing. For ticks, treat them with liquid pitch and lard. And for fleas, treat them with crushed cumin mixed with water. So additionally, when dogs bite humans, some common treatments were to add vinegar, honey, and different herbs and botanicals to treat the wound. From our zooarchaeological or skeletal evidence, an overview of the various skeletal clues for dogs in antiquity reveals that broken bones do show up occasionally, as well as common things like broken teeth, a fractured rib, infected toes, and of course, arthritis in old age. However, none of those skeletal things registers in frequencies much different than today, suggesting that treatments of dogs back in antiquity and today did not vary significantly. That said, domestic dogs in antiquity do show more pathological signs than wolves. So perhaps domestic dogs were prone to more accidents. They lived longer lives. There were more infections and other ailments than their wild progenitors. Some of those broken bones on domestic dogs could be from maltreatment. And the fact that there's numerous references and treatments for dog bites in antiquity shows that tempers could flare up. Nevertheless, there's not a lot of skeletal evidence of broken ribs and face bones for ancient dogs, so areas where they might be more likely to inflict abuse, for example. So it certainly appears that the ancient Romans and Greeks tried their best to care for and treat their pet dogs. Naturally, they saw value, even if just social value, in those animals and wanted to keep them happy, healthy, protected, and loved. And I'm sure many pet owners today feel the same way. So another example how present and the past certainly align.
Yes, there's so many more examples that we could discuss, but I think we'll wrap up here. So we'll go in the next slide to our conclusion and Q&A. So just want to wrap up by saying overall, today we've looked at art, science, and text to get a glimpse of how people have valued dogs as companions and cared for them in many ways, as we still do today. So we'd be happy to take your questions now. And let's start with, I'm already getting a lot of questions about, what about cats? Someone asked, did others fancy cats in ancient times other than the Egyptians? So Michael, do you have an answer for that?
Sure. Well, if you go back with the domestication of cats happened about 7,500 BC. So certainly after dogs were in play, and that happened in the Near East for the cats. And we see most of our evidence for cats are really with the Egyptian in the dynastic time. So about 4,000 BC, we see cats are kind of protected and venerated and honored and become important in Egyptian life and religion. So the Egyptians kind of held on to that for a while and didn't sort of disseminate cats out to the rest of the ancient world so much. When they do get into the Greek and Roman world, cats are really mostly used for, well, as mousers. They weren't really considered as pets. But we do see, people sort of curious about cat behavior and the cuteness and the, chasing strings and wool and thing like that. So eventually we see a few references to cats as pets in antiquity, but cats are those who have them, pretty solitary animals in most cases, and certainly will keep to themselves. And certainly for the burials of these things, cats usually like to wander off and be by themselves. So we don't see the extent of cat burials in the same way that we see dogs, because dogs kind of have that more companionship characteristic in antiquity, and certainly were promoted in that respect. So cats less so, and really it's cats post-antiquity and through medieval and later times that garner more of that pet-like characteristic for people. So dogs ruled supreme as the important pets for Greek and Roman times.
Yes.
No dissing to cat people out there.
Yeah, cats are great too. I had a cat when I was growing up as well. Great. So another question is there any indication or preference in color or patterns for specific dog breeds or dog professions, like black watchdogs and lighter colored pet dogs? Yeah, so definitely one of the ancient authors, I believe it was Varro, says that it's better to have black watchdogs because you can't really see them in the night. And then, so I guess they're more stealthy. And then during the day, they're more startling as a guard dog. And then sheepdogs, it's better to have them as white dogs because it's easier for the shepherd to differentiate them from a wolf that's, I guess, presumably, gray or some other color like that. Yeah, so Michael, do you have anything to add to that?
No, well, certainly from the zooarchaeological evidence, we can't really tell without DNA clues, aspects about things, the color of the dog or those, kind of morphological characteristics. We get certainly the height and size and certain dimensions. And yes, there is, as we've noted, breeding of different qualities of those dogs that suit best for hunting purposes, for guard purposes, so they were attuned to developing those characteristics that suit the purpose, social, economic, that they wanted.
Yeah, definitely. And here's another question for you, Michael. So what dog breeds were associated with Asclepius? Do we have any particular evidence for this? Do you know? Or just generally dogs?
Yeah, mostly it's just dogs in general for
Mhm.
Asclepius, and most likely be in that case, mid-range size, medium-sized dogs tend to be the ones that are depicted most with him, not toy breeds. Sometimes we get ones that might be akin more to greyhound style, but really it's nondescript. And the connection there claimed that dogs had healing, curative properties, that especially when they're licking their wounds, that was a sign of that the dog had some special curative aspect within that saliva or in the treatment. So that then kind of got spilled over into general curative aspects, and then links up with Asclepius, who's the god of healing. So it's sort of that symbolic curative aspect that align the two together.
Okay, very interesting. Let's see. So this is an interesting question. So once Romans started making toy dogs, did people make fun of over-the-top owners who treated their dogs better than people the way we do today, like celebrities with dogs peeking out of purses, or does more evidence just document affection? So just off the top of my head, I do remember seeing this one text of an inscription, and it was for a dog, and the text at one point says, "Oh, don't make fun of this tomb. It's for this dog who was super cherished." So I think there was some maybe people making fun of people treating their dogs too much like humans.
Yeah, and to add to that, well, a lot of it depends on the genre of the literature as well. So certainly the satires, we get a couple of those snippet type of things that people might make. In some cases, Juvenal, who's a satire writer, writes that women prefer their dogs more than their men. So you get that little kernel of ancient feminism, perhaps, or that men can't do anything. And then certainly in the Satyricon, this kind of comical thing, there's references to coddling of little toy dogs, but much of that is sort of social commentary against they didn't like those people, or this person was trying to show off too much, so they get ridiculed in that respect. But from the tombstones, certainly we see that the effort put into depiction of stuff such as the Helena case or some other little sonnets or poems or epitaphs about these dogs certainly show that great investment and care was there at a real level. And I think a lot of people today feel that same affection for their animals. They'll do anything and everything for them, and treat them as better than members of the family in some cases.
Yes, for sure. Here's another good question for you, Michael. So what were the grave goods associated with the dog burials? So we mentioned the perfume vase. Were there any other things found with dogs?
The Yasmina one's special with the perfume vase. In other cases, for toy breeds, I don't know of any specific grave goods outside the Yasmina one that are there. In most cases, some of the grave goods are just sort of generic things like a small pottery vessel or these glass vessels, these unguentaria. We don't seem to get anything that has, like King Tut style, lavish tombs with lots of grave goods. So the dogs get, in some cases, just small things. And in most of these are just sort of generalized things that maybe humans would get as well. So things that sort of don't cater specifically to the dog, such as, actually a couple cases we see bones, maybe a pig bone or a beef bone. So you get, okay, maybe, that dog got a good meal in death, but things are less specific in terms of the artifacts that are there with it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Um, People, definitely wanted their dogs to have a good afterlife
Yeah.
as well. So I'm just looking through the questions. So we have a couple that are talking about dog breeding. So where would people be buying their dogs, or would they go to a breeder, or how did breeding occur?
Yeah, a good question. We don't have all the information with that. Certainly more attention in the ancient sources, but we have sort of farming manuals that are there. So practice guides of how to do correct farming. So certainly you can see in those ones dogs do factor, and they talk about the breeds of them and the characteristics of each breed, but they don't really go into a lot of details about you know who's doing this, aside from we've assumed sort of the farmer is kind of manipulating or parlaying with the other farmers, but we don't have sort of specific dog breed houses in antiquity, or sort of that might occur today. So certainly the ancients were kind of aware of with all of their livestock, including dogs, taking kind of the tallest cow, for example, breed it with the tallest cow, and you get a tall cow. So they played around with take a big dog with a smaller dog, what kind of varieties you get. So they're curious about those things, but we don't have really evidence that people, there were specialized breeding houses or places for these things. I think a lot of it was probably some trial and error at some degree initially that kind of piqued public interest. And then people just sort of continued with that, or found ways to breed small ones with small ones and get more small ones. And that sort of just fed off its own kind of inertia and the craze that might be behind it.
Yeah,
So
just
the point to make with that is that we often kind of think, oh, maybe these ancient people, unlike world that has genetics, didn't know genetics, but certainly were savvy about kind of mixing things to create, quality stock or the quality types of animals that they wanted. So I guess they weren't dumb, but certainly they continue this without a knowledge of how genetics work in its scientific aspect. So I think quite smart and savvy breeders and herders overall.
yes, absolutely. Yeah, just to add to that, I believe it's also Vero who says for sheepdogs, you should buy a sheepdog from a shepherd and not from a butcher, because a dog that's coming from a butcher is going to be lazy, because they're used to getting scraps of meat all the time or something like that. And then you shouldn't also get them from a hunter because they'll be too busy trying to track other scents. That's also
Yeah.
a fun tidbit, yeah, from the ancient sources.
Yeah. So certainly there is this kind of maybe inbred
Mhm.
pedigree type of thing that's there, maybe not overtly, but in a covert way, they knew, okay, do this and you can get quality. And certainly, I think a lot of aspects, I think in antiquity were about competition. Just like today, you've got the latest this, that, the other thing gadget, and people want it. So kind of word of mouth and that spread really, especially in the world of Roman antiquity, where people desired things to make them unique from others or put them into the right crowd, to find the best quality animal was a way to showcase yourself, and the best quality pet was really a super way to showcase yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Let's see. So we already talked about cats a bit. What other types of animals did people keep as pets?
Oh, well, we get an array. So they're I guess whatever animals out there could potentially be used as a pet in terms of naming things. So certainly equids, horses, donkeys, mules. I mean, horses were named, but horses were not only pets for some, but certainly served great purpose for riding and showcasing and things like that. Birds could be pets. We hear people get specialized aviaries or houses where they contained birds. So probably they were naming some of them and just inquisitive about the bird behavior in these aviaries. Always fun to watch. So birds could fulfill those purposes. Fish, in some cases, we have ancient texts mentioned, eels in one case kept as a pet, or in another case, there's a dolphin, well, not technically a fish, but a large mammal.
Mhm.
This tale that Pliny the Elder, an ancient historian, encyclopedia writer, talks about a pet dolphin that a boy had a pet dolphin, and the boy died. So the dolphin died subsequently of a broken heart because that connection with the boy was severed. So kind of the deeper emotional bonds that can be there between, in this case, a dolphin. We get snakes and lizards and even some wild animals, but always be cautious about the wild animals, because a lot of that where people say, oh, he had a pet, this emperor had a pet tiger or lion or elephant or these types of things, are more probably less that it was a real pet, but more that this is a ferocious animal that gets tied up with the power and might of the emperor. So certainly there's a lot of those social signals that we have to be, read the ancient sources with a grain of salt, because a lot of it is politically motivated about expressing what message the author wants.
Definitely.
Name it, across the array of animals out there, there's potential for pets, and some real and some imagined, and some cases for antiquity where, yes, it happened, and others we have to be a little bit cautious about reading it literally.
Yes, absolutely. So kind of related to what you were talking about with, famous people having pets. There's a question about were there examples of divinized dogs, so actual dogs that lived and then acquired some sort of divine status after they passed away. So that's a really interesting question. I don't think I know anything to that level, but I do know that Alexander the Great, there's some quote in the text that Alexander the Great founded a city for his dog Peritas after his dog passed away. But I can't think of any examples in which dogs were deified. Can you, Michael? I guess in
no, not off the top of my head. Certainly, well, I suppose this is all subjective. People may have their own views of.
right.
I deified this pet, and it was immortal to me because it was a loved one. But I think in terms of written accounts of this, I can't think of anything for the Greek or Roman world of deification of a real animal. Certainly, we've got mythological things for Cerberus, three-headed dogs, these types of things that show up in myth that may have had some special, post-human or supernatural type of connection. Here's a question about were vets a profession back then, or how were dogs, were they healed at home with different home remedies? Well, yes, there were professional veterinarians in antiquity, although certainly medical stuff wasn't viewed often as highly as it is viewed today in our society. And we do get in some of those medical texts, tactics on how to heal fractures, splint bone, broken bones, different remedies for things. Certainly we've seen the examples with Columella already about home remedies for ticks and fleas and all these sorts of ailments with dogs. The curious thing is that with fractures, so broken bones, although they knew how to do this stuff with dogs, of all the skeletal things that I've seen, there's been no evidence amongst them that those breaks were treated by splinting things. So although the knowledge is there, it seems certainly it's worked with humans, and we've got examples of splinted human bones that were healed, but they don't seem to apply it with dogs. So one wonders, okay, maybe the dog was too active and it wouldn't keep to this, couldn't have the bandages on it and hold things properly. But, sort of begs that question about how much of veterinarian care was sort of professionally done, and so that the animal would take to it, versus how much was known, but just not done because they knew that the animal wouldn't wouldn't take or wouldn't accept it. So sort of begs questions about the knowledge of home remedies that are out there versus the practice of that practically in antiquity, well, in its representation ultimately in an archaeological record.
Mhm. Yeah, definitely. Great. So I think maybe we can end with one last question. So thank you so much for all of your questions. I'm sorry we can't get to all of them, but there's one that's talking about trends with dog names. So what are some common names? Are they named after owners, etc.? So a lot of the dog names from Columella's text that we discussed, they're for sheepdogs, and they advise that they should be like 2 syllables, like really short names you can quickly call the dogs when you're out in the field or wherever you are. And then, yeah, so a lot of small dogs, as we mentioned, were named something kind of that's also small, or there's also one inscription for a dog that has passed away, whose name is Bull, which is funny because it was probably for a smaller dog. So it's kind of a joke, like people still do that with their small dogs today. Yeah, do you have anything to add, Michael, to that?
No, so I think a lot of the names were stock names, as we've shown that they just fit the bill, or these were the popular run-of-the-mill names at the time. But we'll dig deeper from our archaeological records to see eventually if those unique names were out there. So we've seen a couple today in terms of like Fly or the Calanthus one for the small vessel, but no, it's a unique question. We'll look for longer lists. Certainly, as we get more inscriptions, it may add to our repertoire of these things, and we'll see that ancient Fido is out there, or one of those names that are less common or less connected with the stock characteristics.
Yes, yeah, pet names are always super fun. Great. Oh, well, thank you so much for all of your questions. Thank you, Michael, again for joining us here today. If you'd like to keep in touch with what's going on, please visit getty.edu to see what other programs are coming up, and we hope to see you soon. Thank you so much.